This seminar is for educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Consult with your medical provider for medical advice or treatment. Although the presenters try to keep the information in this seminar as accurate and timely as possible, the speakers and Mather Hospital assume no duty to ensure the seminar is error-free. The speakers and Mather Hospital are not responsible or liable for any claim, loss, or damage resulting from you viewing this seminar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our HealthyU Webinar Series. Today's topic is coping with stress and anxiety. At any time during the presentation, please feel free to enter any questions you may have using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We will answer as many questions as we can within the time allotted once the presentation concludes. Your questions will remain anonymous. Today's presenter is Denise Driscoll. She's a registered nurse, a certified addictions registered nurse, certified psychiatric clinical nurse specialist, and a certified psychiatric nurse practitioner in New York State. She has practiced behavioral health nursing for the past 35 years and was the first psychiatric nurse practitioner to practice independently at Mather Hospital. She has been fortunate enough to be able to disseminate and present her work in the form of peer-reviewed publications, as well as podium and poster presentations at local and national conferences. Currently the Assistant Vice President for Behavioral Health at Mather Hospital Northwell Health. She is responsible for all behavioral health care delivery for both inpatient and outpatient programs. She was recognized by the American Nurses Association in 2022 as the recipient of the National Advocacy Award in Washington, D.C. for her work in mental health and substance abuse. All right, Denise, let me get your PowerPoint up and I'll get you ready to go.
Right. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you everyone for joining us today on this very timely and important topic. And I hope that you find it very helpful. I'm going to talk about coping with stress and anxiety beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. We can go to the next slide. So the numbers are in. The statistics are here for America, and they are that 95% of Americans experience stress. And the other 5% are lying about it. We can go to the next slide. Everyone experiences stress. Stress is a natural human response. It's inherent. And the World Health Organization tells us that the way we react and respond to stress makes the difference in our overall well-being. We can go to the next slide. So what is stress? Stress is your body's way of responding to any kind of physical or mental pressure or demand. And I want to stress any kind, and we'll get to that in a moment. But stress is generally a short-term experience. Let's go to the next slide. So remember when I said it's any kind of demand. Take a look at this slide and see if you can see which phase of stress that you identify with most. I typically respond most when I think about stress to the gentleman who's in the left-hand corner of our slide who's screaming. That's how I envision when somebody speaks to me about stress. But really, in reality, stress can be from positive things, or stress can be very motivated in the case of receiving a degree or playing sports. So we can go to the next slide. So there's good stress versus bad stress, or eustress versus distress. And even though we're going to focus more on distress today, I also want to let you know that there is a demand on the body or stress that's placed on the body with things that we associate with pleasurable emotions. So for example, getting married or promotion or pregnancy. If you've ever said to yourself, I need a vacation from my vacation, then you're experiencing stress or eustress from something that we associate positive emotions to. On the other hand, distress, or what's labeled as bad stress, is something that we're experiencing with activities that are associated with more negative or unpleasurable emotions. So for example, running late, financial issues, loss, conflicts in relationship. And this is the stress that we're going to most focus on today. But I want you to remember that even when you're doing those activities that maybe have a pleasurable emotions associated with it, it's the same demand on your body. Your body cannot discern whether the demand is positive or not. So we can go to the next slide. So I felt it was really important to talk about the mind-body connection. We sometimes think that this is a new age concept. It's something that is just recently been found, but actually it has been spoken about for centuries. It could be found across religions and philosophies. Marcus Aurelius, who was an emperor in 180 AD, said that the power is in your mind, not in outside events. And if you recognize that, then you will have strength. But it's a concept that we don't do very well. You know, we tend not to like to think about that there's something wrong with our minds. We tend to say, nothing to see here in my mind. You know, there's a stigma that's still attached to it. But it's very important for us to pay attention to this. I have a quote that's on my door that says, take care of your mind because your body is listening. And when you realize that the majority of preventable illnesses are stress related, the mind-body connection makes sense. For instance, how do my intestines know that I had a bad day at work, right? Those cells don't know how to think. Those cells do not know how to communicate. Or how do the cells in my heart know that I've had a fight with a loved one? Well, because they're communicated to by the brain. And we'll get into a little bit about how that communication takes place and what happens to our bodies. But just think for a moment, if you could alter your mind, you may be able to alter your body. So it's an interesting concept. We can go to the next slide. So how does the brain communicate with the cells, such as I was speaking about in the intestines or in our heart? Well, we have pathways from the brain called our nervous system. And the two main ones that are associated with stress are the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a slide or two. And when it perceives stress, a stressful event, or something that's frightening, or something that is dangerous, it increases the adrenaline. It can be motivating. So if I had a little bit of stress before I got on to give this talk today, it can be motivating, but it can also create some stress that can be disruptive to us. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for the relaxation response, to calm you down, to prepare you to rest and restore. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is something that many people have heard about, is that fight or flight. You may have heard about it in news stories where mothers are able to lift cars, or people find this sort of unimaginable strength at a time of, danger or peril. The fight or flight is your body's response to a real or perceived physical or mental threat. I think what's important about this is that it's an automatic physiological reaction to an event that's taking place. And what it triggers off is that sympathetic nervous system. And when we get ready for that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system prioritizes what we might need for that fight and what we don't. For instance, it will shut down the digestive tract. We don't need that, but it's going to send all of that adrenaline to the muscles in case we need to lift something or run from something. So you might have experienced this when you may be walking along and a big dog comes up and barks into a fence. You get that sort of jolt and you get that sort of shaking in your muscles. Or if you have almost a near-miss car accident, it's that shaky feeling. That's the engagement of your sympathetic nervous system. It's a mechanism that's been built within our bodies through homeostasis to aid in a person's survival. We can go to the next slide. But what if you have too much sympathetic response and not enough parasympathetic response? So what if you are an engine that is running at top speed? What if that engine never stops and there's no oil or there's no care taken of it? What will eventually happen to that engine? What's going to happen? Can it be saved? Well, typically we see burnout. And that's what we see within ourselves when we have too much sympathetic response and not enough parasympathetic response. We burn out. So we can go to the next slide. So here's just a little cartoon to illustrate. It's called stress, and it'll help with natural selection. So it's something that was built into the body to help us survive. But if we have too much of it, it could be harmful and even detrimental to us. Let's go to the next slide. So what are some of the effects that we see from this engagement of the sympathetic nervous system and just too much of it? Well, within our body, we feel fatigue. We may have headaches. We may have that tension or tight muscles, skin irritations, or this is one that I find very interesting, frequent infections. When you're constantly engaged with your sympathetic nervous system, the system that fights infection gets put on the back burner. So it makes you open and more vulnerable. It may constrict our breathing. For our mind, it may create worrying or indecision or more negativity, difficulty with decision-making or not thinking clearly enough. It may impair our judgment. In terms of our emotions, we may feel a loss of confidence. We might feel fear or apprehension, indifference or apathy. We may feel sadness, may feel irritable, and we may not be able to sleep. And then certainly stress may drive certain behaviors such as substance abuse. This was a big issue during the pandemic. There was a fueling of what we see today as the opioid crisis because of a lot of the isolation, loss of appetite. You might be more accident prone or restless or lonely. So we can go on to the next slide. So what about prolonged stress and traumatic events? Well, certainly going back to the example of the engine, right? There's wear and tear. It might be ongoing, unrelenting stress that builds up over time without any ability to rest or recover. So if you have that ongoing stress and you're like that engine and you're keeping going, but you're not taking care of yourself or giving yourself that time to rest and restore. It might be associated with loss. Certainly the experience of a significant loss, maybe of others who are important to us in our life, or even parts of ourselves. And I'm just going to scoot down to the green box on the right corner, inner conflict. It may be an experience that challenges our morals or our values, doing something incongruent to what we believe in. And then finally, a traumatic event, a lifetime experience that instills fear or helplessness, and such as many of us have experienced through the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can go to the next slide. So when I was first asked to talk about the emotional response to the COVID-19 pandemic, I thought about all of us as human beings. Every single day, we are faced with risk. But we get up and we function and we go about our day. And I believe this is because we all walk a very fine line of denial. And I don't mean denial that you find in illness or pathology, but the type of healthy protective mechanism that helps us function even despite all the risks around us. Now imagine just for a moment that that very fine line of denial is stripped by something, a danger that is so widespread. And it leaves you open to feelings of fear, anxiety, loss, sadness, grief. And now imagine being in the epicenter of that danger. And you're not only fighting for your survival, but you're fighting for the survival of your loved ones as well. And if we could sit with that for just a moment, we can understand, particularly in New York, particularly in the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic, why many of us are still struggling with this sense of stress, worry, anxiety, and fear. We can go to the next slide. So what was unique about the COVID-19 pandemic? Why are we feeling the way that we're feeling? You may notice around you, your loved ones, or just people that you encounter day to day, may be more irritable, maybe more angry, maybe more sad, maybe more cynical. And that's all due to the uniqueness of the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a pervasive event of uncertain duration that put all of us at risk. Again, it's that pervasiveness, it's that ongoing stressor. It was ongoing vigilance and persistence, sense of life threat. So it was constantly going, thinking back to that engine that's constantly running. It was a greater loss of life than 9/11. I thought that maybe that was the most significant event of my lifetime, but it even surpassed 9/11. It disrupted our mourning and grief rituals. We were not able to mourn the way that we typically mourn. It gave challenges to our family routines. Some of us had to come to work where there was, significant threat. Some people had to figure out how to work from home. Some people had children who could not go to school, so there was childcare issues. Grandparents couldn't babysit because there was this risk of passing this disease onto the most vulnerable. So there was those day-to-day challenges, and then challenges with connectedness in the era of social distancing. Right? When we needed each other the most, we could not be together. We were separated. Many of us were alone. We did not have that connectedness that helps us deal with that stress. And we can go to the next slide. So Patricia Watson is an American psychologist who worked on stress first aid. Stress first aid is a program that was developed by the military for military personnel dealing with stress. And Patricia Watson took that and modified it for healthcare professionals. And I thought that this would be very interesting or important to show you, because I think the colors, we're very familiar with that, particularly if you drive, right? The red, yellow, orange green, we're very sort of aware of what that means. And the stress continuum model assists you to be able to identify where you might fall on the stress continuum. And then from there, once you identify or you're able to recognize what you're experiencing, may guide you in what to do next. So for instance, green being ready to handle stress. You're at your optimal functioning, you're adaptive, you're feeling well. Where yellow might be that mild and transient stress or distress or impairment. It may be I'm late to work, or it may be that my bills, my check bounced, or it may be that you don't have childcare that particular day. But it's usually connected to something that's transient and it goes away and it's somewhat low risk. And then injured is signified by orange, which is more severe and persistent distress or impairment. It tends to leave a scar and put you at higher risk. Or then there's ill, where the stressors have led to clinical mental disorder. It's an unhealed stress injury that causes life impairment. And I'll talk a little bit in a couple more slides about the difference between stress and anxiety, how that falls into the red. So we can go to the next slide. So the ones we want to focus on right now, the distress, the yellow stress versus the orange stress. So again, yellow stress may be related to relationship problems, minor illnesses, money problems, loss of possessions, legal problems, moving, lack of sleep, divorce, and believe it or not, the holidays, right? We might have that yellow stress when it comes up. Versus orange stress, which is a little bit more of an injury. It's due to that wear and tear, that constant stress related to loss. It may be related to a life-threatening or traumatic experience or related to the inner conflict. We can go to the next slide. So our response to this high level or orange stress is an increase in cortisol levels. And cortisol and increased levels will interfere with learning, memory, lower immune function, weight gain, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease or stroke, and anxiety. So that's a lot, right? So we can go to the next slide. So what is anxiety? Often stress and anxiety seems to be intertwined, and we're not talking about the feeling of anxiety or feeling anxious. Anxiety is a sustained mental hygiene issues that can be originally triggered by stress, but it doesn't fade away once the threat has passed. It stays there. And it causes significant impairment in our social, occupational, and areas of living. So I can't get up out of bed. I can't even brush my teeth. I'm afraid to go outside. I avoid connection with other people. I feel this sense of doom in everything that I do. It impairs my ability to have normal activities of daily living. Similar to depression, sometimes when people are experiencing the syndrome of depression, it's not about feeling sad, although that's part of the syndrome. It's about not having enough energy even to get up and brush your teeth. It's that impairment in that functioning that distinguishes this from distress. Let's go to the next slide. So even though anxiety and stress may have some overlapping symptoms and are similar, anxiety is defined by that persistent, excessive worry that doesn't go away even in the absence of a stressor. Where stress is more like a wave, it's more transient in nature. It ends when the stressful situation ends, when we're able to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. Anxiety disorders cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of function. You're not functioning with your activities of daily living. And at that point, treatment is with therapy and/or medications. So those are the key differences there. We can go to the next slide. So a lot of research has been done where people identified 5 major needs to overcome stress, trauma, and adversity. A sense of safety, a sense of calm, an ability to connect, a feeling of self-efficacy or accomplishment, and hope. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a few moments about resilience. During the pandemic, we heard a lot about resilience, but what actually is resilience? Well, resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, tragedy, threats, significant sources of stress. It is neither lucky nor passive, and it takes deliberate effort and can be strengthened with practice. Many people think you have to be born with it. But I'm here to tell you that resiliency, which is the ability to bounce back, is done through practice, preparing your mind for battle. I would love to sit here today to tell you that you, through certain, steps, could live a stress-free, trauma-free life, but life is not that way. But what we can do, remembering the power is in our mind, is that we can prepare our mind for battle. And that's what resiliency is. We can go to the next slide. And how do you get resilience? What are those interpersonal factors of resilience? Well, there's 3 of them. There's an emotional component, a cognitive or a thinking component, and a coping component. Emotional is the expression of difficult feelings. I think out of the 3, this is the most difficult one, the one that people have most difficulty over. And I think that that's due to whatever we grew up in, whatever we were marinated in growing up, will sort of teach us how to express emotions or whether we express emotions. For instance, my husband, who is an engineer, came from a family who he very admittedly will tell me does not express emotions. Where I come from a family that we express every emotion that we have, maybe not always good. So there's that difference in whatever you grew up with. But the idea here is that repressed emotions or emotions buried alive never die. They don't go away. They're there and can come out in maladaptive ways. So it's very important to express those emotions. When I used to do therapy, I used to work with clients who were having difficulty expressing their feelings. I would have them imagine, if you're as old as I am, those styrofoam floats that we used to have as kids. And I would say to the person, imagine yourself in a pool and pushing that styrofoam all the way underneath the pool and then stepping on it. The styrofoam being your emotions, pushing them down and standing on it. It doesn't make you feel free. It makes you feel stuck. It doesn't give you the ability to move around. But now imagine letting it rise to the surface and float around with you. It doesn't have that same consequence as if you push or repress those feelings. So this is a very important but most difficult step that people have. Cognitive, or the way that we think, is the ability to challenge negative thoughts and attitudes and create positivity and affirmations. So again, depending upon what environment we grew up in or what we've practiced over the years, will determine how well you do with this. For instance, the brain is amazing, right? It's the most amazing organ in the body. And it will try to conserve energy when it can. And those things that we do repetitively, the things that we do over and over again, the brain will recognize it and it will put it on automatic. So for instance, I can't see any of you, but you can raise your hands and you can shout it or shout, yes, that's me, or write in the chat. How many of you out there have ever been in the shower and have said to yourself, did I wash my hair this morning? Or if you drive the same way home every day and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go to the grocery store after work today, which is not part of my normal routine. And the next thing that you know, you're pulling into your driveway. And that's because the brain, again, wants to conserve energy. And so it puts certain things on automatic. So if you've grown up or in your adult life, if you've been very negative and focused on negativity and talk to yourself in very negative ways, the brain will pick up on that. It doesn't discern whether it's positive or negative, and it will say, this is something we do, and I'm putting it on automatic. And so we don't even know that it's happening. If you walk across the carpet the same way every day, or if you walk across the grass lawn the same way every day, you make that trail. And that's what happens to us in terms of our thinking. So we need to create those positive thoughts. We need to create those positive affirmation and get our brain to kind of refocus and retrail so that we're feeling more positive. There's a great theory that's out there about depression and anxiety, and it's called the cognitive behavioral theory. And that's if I think something long enough, I'm going to start to feel it. And when I start to feel it, I'm going to behave that way. And when I behave that way, that reinforces my thoughts. So for example, if I'm thinking that I am an awful person, and that's the only thing I think over and over again, I'm going to start to feel like an awful person. And when I'm feeling like an awful person, well, I'm going to start to behave like an awful person, which reinforces our thinking. So this is just retraining our thinking and creating those new pathways. And then finally, coping. Coping is that active process. It's that doing. It's the problem solving. It's finding out what works for you, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. And we'll certainly, by the end of this, talk about some of those concrete coping activities. I have a very good friend of mine who likes to go out. She finds a lot of solace in nature, and she goes out and is among the trees. And for me, the only time I go out is to make sure I pick up and bring in my Chico's packages, right? So that's not for me. So you have to find out what works for you and then practice it like anything else in life. So we can go to the next slide. So I would be remiss if not to mention that sometimes people will engage in negative coping strategies in response to stress. So there's strategies that might seem to temporarily relieve stress, but actually in the long run cause long-term issues. So for example, smoking or overeating or drugs and alcohol or excessive anger. So we might get some sort of solace, or we might get some immediate feeling about that, but they cause problems in the long term. So now we can go to the next slide. So I grouped strategies for stress into those 5 areas where people identified would help them with trauma and stress and adversity. So first we have calming strategies. What are some of those strategies? So again, thinking of the nervous system, strategies to engage the the parasympathetic nervous system. So relaxation, meditation, Prayer is a form of meditation. Exercising or redirecting that energy. Making sure that we have adequate sleep, or being mindful, being in the moment, what's positive. Deep breathing, and deep breathing actually engages that parasympathetic nervous system and calms down all of those things that the sympathetic nervous system put into gear. It may be simple as taking a break or decreasing your stimuli, listening to music, and certainly turning off those electronics, specifically before bed. I have some things here that I tend to use for calming, certainly aromatherapy. I have a diffuser that's here in my office. Lavender, bergamot is very helpful and useful with anxiety. That's something that's very calming. I have these discs here. If you've ever seen them, they're called the Now, and they're a disc that actually play very soothing tones, and that can help. It's a 3-minute meditation that can be done very easily or quickly, or simply just taking time to do what's called square breathing, where we inhale for 4, hold it for 4, and then exhale for 4 and wait for 4 before inhaling again. And doing that engages that parasympathetic nervous system. So we can go to the next slide. So dealing with stress, connect strategies. So talking with a friend or connecting with nature, attending a religious service, being in the presence of something that may be greater than just the focus on ourselves, volunteering, journaling, calling a helpline, being in the library. I find that this is a very soothing activity. I'm around people. I'm around where there's some activity, but it's calming, and I don't have to engage with anyone if I choose not to. Maybe doing something that I enjoy for leisure, or certainly connecting with others with humor. One example that I have for you here, in terms of journaling, hoping you can see this. I pick these up. A lot of times I find them at Dollar Tree. You know, they're just different books to journal in, and it makes me feel connected. I'm expressing it and I'm connecting it. Even though it's not going to another person, I'm somehow expressing that and getting that out, and something that I could look at a later time. So we can go to the next slide. And strategies for safety. So not compromising on your morals or values, not engaging in something that will make you have that inner conflict. Creating safe spaces, engaging in self-care. Self-care is not being selfish. It's taking care of ourselves. It's putting that oil into the engine and taking care of that. Taking a break, asking for support, creating those boundaries. Boundaries create safety. Knowing your limits and saying no. Here's an example that I have. This is another thing that I got from Dollar Tree. This is a little box. And inside of this box, I have a little pencil and I have a little pad. And if you can see, I have a lot of these little pieces of paper in there. If there's something that I'm worrying about, or something that I can't really handle, or something that I need to give up, I might throughout the day write it on this little piece of paper, and I lock it away in the box, keeping it in a safe place. I can't handle it right now, but maybe later I'll look at it again. When I've spoken about this before and I've showed this, some people have said to me, I need a much bigger box than that. And I always joke to say that my friends and my family all know that they at any time could be one of those little pieces of paper in my box. So we can go to the next slide. And then strategies with self-efficacy. So certainly self-efficacy is feeling accomplished. So goal setting. Prioritizing if you're during a project that's causing a demand or a stress. The ability to complete a task. Problem solving. Developing routines. One of the things that I find that's very helpful is doing puzzles. I recently shared this with my aunt, and she said, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do this 1,000-piece puzzle. And I said, why don't you try it? And she called me back and she said, we're on our second puzzle. We love it. We're focusing on the puzzle. We're not thinking about anything that's stressful or anxious. And when we're done, we feel accomplished. We have that self-efficacy. So that's our self-efficacy strategies. And then I think we have one more slide. Go to the next one. Dealing with hope and strategies for hope, and certainly positive affirmations, working on changing our perspectives about things, looking at that old saying as the glass half full, having gratitude. You know, it's very easy to focus on what's not going right. It's very easy to focus on what we don't have. But what if we focused on what we do have, and that gratitude for those people, and those things within our life that bring us joy, and then finding joy even in the most simplest of things. For positive affirmations, you know, I have these. I'm known on my door here at work that I have a lot of different positive affirmations that I put out, again, to change that mindset, to remind somebody of something that is positive. I have some jewelry with sayings. I have keychains with sayings. And again, it's just to bring up that awareness about not focusing on the negative, but focusing on the positive. Now, I want to just take a moment out just to let you know that this is not a one and done, right? Stress is a constant. It's a part of life. And we may be better at it at some days than others. There may be days in which we're feeling sad and anxious and mad and angry, and we're not saying our positive affirmations, or we're not going and exercising, or we're not reaching out for help. But we can always get back on. If we fall off the horse, we can get back on again. So I don't want you to despair. This is a process, this like anything else, right? We don't go on a diet for one day and lose 50 pounds. We're not going to say one positive affirmation and change our mindset in one day. This needs to be incorporated into your everyday life. It's that important. And in that way, we will start to change the way we react and respond to our stress, and therefore change our well-being. So we can go to the next slide. So to remember, if you can see this picture, we have the first place winner, right? She looks a little negative there, right? She looks as she's crying. And the third place winner is extremely happy. So attitude is everything. The way in which we look at life and the way that we choose to look at things will make all of the difference. So I thought we have a few more minutes. So I thought for our very last slide that I'm going to start you off with some practice today. So I want you to get comfortable where you are, get into a nice comfortable position. If you feel okay to, you can close your eyes. I just want you for one moment to take a nice deep breath in through your nose and let it out. And we're going to do that again. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose. And let it out. Exhale through your mouth. I want you to keep breathing in and exhaling, taking a focus on your breath. Push all of your thoughts aside and just be present with us here in the moment. As I'm going to read to you a writing on hope written by Micah Christensen. Choosing to hope is like lighting a candle on a dark road. The candle will not show you what lies too far ahead, but it casts enough light for you to find your way out of the present darkness. What is beautiful about this image is that when two or more come together, holding their candles of hope, they disperse more of the darkness and are able to see further ahead, and they become beacons for others to find their way. So take a moment to think about, just for today, what brings you hope. And when you're feeling stressed today, bring your mind back to what brings hope and positivity into your life. Now let's take one last deep breath in through your nose, and exhale, and come back into the space. I want to thank you very much for your attention today. I hope that some of this was helpful for you, and I wish everyone great success with whatever you choose along the way.
Thank you so much, Denise. That was such an informative presentation. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. Denise, are you able to see the questions, or do you want me to read them out?
I can see.
Okay.
Would you like me to read them out?
Yeah.
So this is a question: only child taking care of my parents, suggestions for help. Certainly understand that that's extremely stressful. So take tiny little breaks for yourself. I always tell people that one place in the world that nobody can ever refuse you to go is the bathroom, right? So take a break for yourself, just as we did this quick meditation. There's many of them online. I suggest Health Journeys by Belle Ruth Knappersack. Just take 2 minutes. Take 2 minutes and just engage that parasympathetic nervous system. Do meditations in the morning and at night. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. It's so important. Whenever you take a plane ride, the stewardess always says, put the oxygen, if you're traveling with small children, put the oxygen on yourself first so that you can care for small children. And that's the same. If we have a pitcher of water and we're doling it out, but we never go back for a refill, we're going to feel depleted. So make sure that you're doing self-care. And I also might recommend journaling, right? Sometimes it's very lonely when you're caring for others, to get those feelings out, and certainly get that support. So I hope that that was helpful for you. Just some comments. That it was excellent and helpful, and just thank you for the presentation. Any other questions? Be happy to answer.
We'll give it a few moments.
Okay.
See if anybody's typing anything up.
I think once you practice these things, it's foreign at first, but as you practice them over time, they become habits. So even if you just add in that 2-minute meditation day and night, that you journal one positive affirmation or one thing that you're grateful for. Once you start to practice that, it's not going to seem as foreign or as uncomfortable.
All right, so we'll call it there. If anybody has any other questions, you can email them at matherhospital@northwell.edu. Once you exit the webinar, you'll see a link to a brief survey. If you can complete that survey for us, that'd be very helpful in creating future programs. I just wanted to thank you all again today for joining us, and thank you again, Denise. If you want to view previous HealthyU webinars, you can see them at www.matherhospital.org/healthy. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much.